Great, let's get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Barrett Louie, part of the marketing team here at RiskIQ. Today we'll be reviewing the top threats of 2020 and diving into the implications for 2021. Before we get started, there are a couple housekeeping notes. First, today's workshop is being recorded. Second, today's session will be interactive. Throughout the workshop, we'll be unmuting lines for questions and conversation. If you have a question while your line is muted, please send them through the questions window in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll answer as many questions as we can as we go. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. First, Benjamin Powell. Benjamin is RiskIQ's Director of Technical Marketing and will be leading today's workshop with Brandon Dixon, RiskIQ's VP of Strategy, and our special guests from Hacker Valley Studio podcast, Chris Cochran and Ronald Eddings. The duo that inspires folks to do the best they can in cybersecurity and host of the famous Hacker Valley podcast. If you haven't checked it out, visit hackervalley.com to catch up on the current season. And with that, I'll hand it over to Benjamin.
Hi everyone. Hey, thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited about today's workshop and really excited about the guests that I got on here. Brandon, founding member of Passive Total, creator of this product that everyone loves and works in, and his insights and strategy for our organization is incredible. And then Chris and Ron with their knowledge of the industry, the easy framework, and everyone they've spoken to and their thoughts and knowledge of where we're going. I think this is going to be a really good workshop for all of us. So what I want to do is I want to go through and give out the promo code. So on the very top of our screen and at the very bottom of every slide that we have today, you'll see the promo code. It's VRTHW for Virtual Threat Hunting Workshop -2020 review, because we're going to talk about what happened this last year in threat intelligence and security infrastructure with organizations, and then what the future holds and where we see it going. So to start it off, I'm going to go through real quick and do some background. So quickly, I'll give you some background on myself, and then I'll let everybody else introduce themselves. So I'm Benjamin Powell. I'm the Director of Technical Marketing here at RiskIQ. I worked in IT for over 30 years. Half of my time was running IT groups and security groups at different organizations. I've worked in state government, the International Airport at San Diego, the port. We were the port district at the time, so we also did the port. Worked in education, biotech, financial services, manufacturing, and software development. So fun fact is I enjoy spearfishing. In my background, you could probably see some of my spear guns. But in IT, if I tell that to people, they kind of laugh and don't want to take my emails. But I actually go out and swim in the ocean and catch fish. So with that, I'll turn this over to Brandon now to introduce himself.
Thanks, Benjamin. Happy to be here as well. So I guess the interesting bits about me come from a background of being an analyst and working cyber espionage cases. That's kind of how Passive Total was originally born. I've been running Passive Total for, I guess quite some time. We sold the business over to RiskIQ. From there, we integrated it, ran product for a couple of years, and now run strategy. I'm gonna give a fun fact as well. I roast coffee. I very much enjoy coffee. I'm sitting in my basement right now, looking at my coffee machine and setup. It's a thing of beauty, and I very much enjoy endurance sports. And just a couple weeks ago, ran my first ultra marathon 42 miler. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Chris and Ron.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Chris Cochran. I'm one half of the Hacker Valley Studio podcast. It's always great to be here with our good friends at RiskIQ. I've been in cybersecurity for about 14 years now or so. Started in the Marine Corps, was at the National Security Agency doing intelligence. Been in intelligence for a large part of my career, and then most recently I lead security engineering for a fintech company. And I guess I got to come up with a fun fact. So I guess my fun fact is that before the Marine Corps, I was a professional dancer. So Most people are surprised when they hear that, but
That is a fun fact.
Hey, Ron, it's up to you now.
Yes, and maybe if it's fun enough, Chris will give us a little dance. But thanks so much, RiskIQ, for having us. My name is Ron Eddings. It says Ronald there. Feel free to call me Ron. And I'm the other half of Hacker Valley Studio podcast. I'm a son of cybersecurity. I've been in the industry ever since graduating from really high school. I had an early start, great mentors, worked heavily in automation, threat intel automation, and been on both sides of the house, vendor and practitioner at enterprise organizations. Really happy to be here, and thanks everyone for taking the time out.
So one thing I want to mention is we try to educate the community. We're trying to give back, and is the best way to learn is not during an attack, it's before an attack, to go through and figure out what happened with other attacks. So then if you see those patterns or you see something happening, you can take action right away and know what you need to do. So one of the things that we've done is on our website, if you go to riskiq.com/threat-hunting-resources, some of these that Brandon and I put together ourselves, where we actually went through and would do full-blown investigations, looking at known good, known bad, starting from something bad, starting from something good, and even looking at, Brandon had gone through and created a couple-hour presentations looking at open source intelligence and how to properly use a project to go through and dig through every piece of the infrastructure, looking at all the different data and creating the infrastructure chain and documenting it for full-blown investigations. So you had done, I think, Turla and Ocean Lotus, I think you went through. They're all up here. And so these are all available to you to go through and improve your skills. So all the data that we do is live. So remember that if we do go to a website or show something, you have to have some caution. We always recommend you don't go there directly. You have to use a tool that goes and grabs the data for you to have that buffer. So that's why Passive Total is so great, is that everything is already gathered for you. So when you start your investigation, you're all ready to go. You don't have to go out there and gather the data and link it together like if you started from scratch and you didn't have a tool like Passive Total. But the cool thing is that the threat actor doesn't know you're investigating them, because the data has already been gathered for you. So you're not tipping them off that you're finding out all the pieces that make up their infrastructure. So just bear that in mind. Barrett, I just wanted to make sure, do we have some poll questions for the audience? I know that you were going to do some.
Usual poll questions. Actually, let me get those queued up. 1 second.
Okay.
You can keep moving, Benjamin. We'll revisit.
No problem. So I want to explain how RiskIQ gathers this data, because this is really important to understand that we go out and we crawl the entire IPv4 space. We looked at over 220 different ports. We start crawling from over 150 different countries through proxy network. We go from commercial, residential, and mobile IP space, and we imitate all the popular browsers, applications, and operating systems. And the reason why we do this is the same reason why, like threat actors, once you publish how you found them, they change their mode of operation, and their techniques, and procedures might change over time. So if we came out from our own data center, the threat actors would just filter our data from our IP, filter our crawls from our IP space. So we have to actually come out from different places. They might target a specific country in the world or a particular device or operating system. So we actually have to appear as the intended victim. I always say that's like your parents. We always have to appear like somebody that's going to get popped, so we can see the data and we can see what's happening. And so the way that we do that is through virtual user technology, where we actually go out and maybe perform a search. We'll present cookies and keep session. We might go through and click on a couple pieces of a couple of the links, and then have another crawler go on and grab some more information, and then in the back end piece it all together. So we, from pulling in that full document object model, we understand where we got the data from and how it's related to every other website in the world. the console log messages, the cookies, the headers, the dependent requests, the files, all that stuff. And that allows us to get this internet intelligence graph of the internet, how everything is connected. So like the roadmap. So we look at over 220 different ports. We do over 2 billion web requests a day. We're tracking, over 16,000 causes, like when you look to see why a host pair happened. We're mapping over 157 billion relationships across the internet. So it's wonderful for threat investigation, because if you start off with a single piece of malware or something, a single indicator, we're able then to look at the layer 2 and layer 3 perspective to say, how has this grown? And this is because of the data sets and the history of information that we have. So we're able to eliminate that entire chain for you. So if you started off with an open source piece of intelligence and you wanted to look inside of RiskIQ, what we found was when we spoke to threat investigators, they would get an article and they go, oh, that's great. Let me go to passive total, and I'm going to search for all those things to see how much more infrastructure that's there, or if anything is related to my own organization. So RiskIQ launched this threat portal this year, where we would take the articles that were published, and then our analysts and researchers would look at that and add more indicators to it to help people. So instead of having you run these searches on your own and trying to piece this together, we wanted you to start you further down that path. So if you started off with those initial indicators that were published, RiskIQ will have all of that other infrastructure that we've determined on our own linked together for you. So you already get those indicators. So just from coming to our threat portal and looking at the articles or searching for something and finding an article about it, you will generally find more information right away to jumpstart your investigations. So the historic look, going back in time, we have over 10 years worth of data. So all of those maps look at when something happened and when it changed, so we can see when somebody was popped and when they corrected that issue, or vulnerable, and then when it was corrected. So we can go back in time and look at that information. So when we look at all the data that we're bringing in, we look at over 250,000 new domain resolutions a day. There's over 5.5 new host resolutions we see. We have over 106 billion unique DNS records. I already mentioned the web requests, but we also have over 334 million mobile apps, looking at about 300 mobile app stores around the world. And you're probably thinking, there's Google, there's Apple, but then there's ones where they host the APK files, or they link back to the original stores. So there's these other mobile app stores around the world. So we have one of the largest mobile app databases in the world, where we look at this type of information to be able to link that together to find threats and vulnerabilities that might be out there. So as this data comes in from our crawling infrastructure and our sensor network, it goes through our analysis. And when the analysis looks at it, security researchers or threat intel people might say, hey, we found this thing, we now want to put it to scale. They talk to the data scientists, and then they create machine learning algorithms that can pull that data out and bring it in. And as that data comes in, we have like the whois records, the passive DNS, the crawls that we had with the full document object model, the certificates, the mobile apps, all that comes in, and we can figure out, 0 days, scams, blacklists, spam, malware, IoTs, and we have all the data that we have. So that helps us really have this capability that no one has, because we're not relying upon feeds. We're actually gathering and hunting for this data on our own. But we also have the capability to go back in time, and it's not just because we have history. We have the capability of going back in time and like putting a rule in place. So think of it this way, like a SIM. If you find an event, you might create a rule to say, if I see this again, alert me. But just imagine if you can go back in time and put that same rule in effect to say, if I see this, let me know, and then run that forward through time. So you need a time machine for that if you had like a SIM. So you'd have to have like the Back to the Future car with a flux capacitor to go back in time, but we actually have that capability. So if we, for example, if we saw that there was a cookie that was base 64 encoded, we can go to the aggregate of data that we had from yesterday, and then we can take today's data that we've collected. And when we merge that data together from what we've collected and what we had in the past, we can put that in effect, that rule in effect, and then create a new aggregate data set. And then that could be available to you. So we can go back in time and roll a complete new data set forward, or a new component, or a new cookie, or something that wasn't seen before. So that overlays with our map that I showed you previously to say we can go back in time and create something. So that gives us the capability where we can show you your security posture, we can look at your controls and policies, we can model something to say, would this happen? Is this happening? Or, did this happen with your investigations? So when you look at everything that we do, we're focused in the cyber kill chain, everything before your firewall. Like most organizations can only view and control what they have access to, which is generally within their own organization. So it's behind the firewall. But with us, we can see within the deep and dark web if someone was talking about something, when they're scanning you, when they set up their infrastructure, and when it becomes weaponized. So the typical type of thing that might happen is there might be discussions on the deep and dark web. They might ask, hey, are there any compromised hosts? So those are the early warning signs. They might register a typo squatted domain, which is not illegal. They might park it, still not illegal, but then they might put your logo on there, your images. So once that happens, it's domain infringement. And if it's email capable, it could be set up for phishing. That's when we can take action. So RiskIQ can generally find something about 1 to 4 days before it's active. And if we can take it down before it really goes into effect, the cost is low, and the amount of risk that you have or exposure goes down tremendously. Once it gets inside your organization, all bets are off. You could have a big exposure. So we're trying to stop it before it gets on the inside. So that's where we're focused. And as those sites go down and they're taken down and they come back up, we can find them and monitor and let you know. But the cool thing about this is that we all function on the internet. And because we all work on the internet, we're on the same playing field. And there's certain rules, and you can't avoid those rules. So you're giving out signals, and the signals that you're giving out can be captured. And if they're captured, you can do something with it. You can link those together. So if we had a threat actor and we have a targeted user and they're going to be working on the internet, the threat actor in Brazil, just from going on the internet, has an IP address, a net block, autonomous system number, internet service provider, just from going online. When they create their phishing email, there's going to be an email provider, there'll be a subject, we'll know what language that they use, there'll be a date timestamp, there might be an attachment, it might be HTML enabled, so they can have it communicate back, and then they send the email. And then all those transit IP addresses, the net blocks they're going through, the transit times and autonomous systems that they travel through to get to that end user in Canada can be traced back. And then the person who opens the phishing email, if it's HTML, they could fingerprint the machine. They could find out, the operating system. They can see if they read it. They have all this information. So these are the signals that are out there, but you have to collect them. And so we encourage you can be doing the same thing internally. You should be collecting this information, setting up NTP with your logs, so all of them are linked together so you can look at the timings of these things. Now, for us, the signals that we're gathering are the passive DNS, the WHOIS records, the certificates, the trackers, the little bits of code that are being used for user experience, host pairs, the cookies, the hashes, open source intelligence articles that other people publish or we publish, document object model. Once we determine something's bad, that DOM is stored for forever, so we can go back and create those new things. Otherwise, the metadata is stored, so we have those things and link it together. The headers, the console log messages, the open ports, and the exposed services. But there's some caveats. just from having one indicator saying, hey, this looks bad, doesn't mean it's bad. Just means it's suspicious. So for example, if somebody uses a free certificate authority, that could be suspicious, but it doesn't mean it's malicious. So we always say you need some multiple points of proof to really make a good determination. So you need about 3 good points of proof to really make a good analysis and figure out that this is really good or bad. So just remember that. So you need to keep that in mind. So one thing that's bad doesn't mean it's bad, but as you link other things together, saying, hey, it's a typo squatted domain, it's a free certificate authority. Oh, it had previously that IP address was a known bad. So now you have multiple points of proof where you can really figure out that it's good or bad. Now, everything that we're doing, you could be doing internally with your logs and your messages and linking that together. And we've done things with partners now, like, for example, CrowdStrike and Splunk, where you have those rich repositories of internal collections of signals and linking that to the outside world to be able to give you 360-degree visibility to understand the inside and the out and what's happening. So with that overview of what we're doing, I want to turn this over to Chris and Ron and Brandon to start their discussion, because this is where the magic happens.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the best thing to really do, especially with a year-end review like this, we really have to take a look at what that stage looks like. And one thing I think about when you think about all the stuff that's happened with COVID, a lot of things happen for a lot of people, both personally and professionally. But then you think about businesses and this huge transformation that my good friend Ron Eddings likes to talk about all the time, is that this amplified the amount of people that had to move to cloud native services. They had to, develop infrastructure so that they could work remotely with their folks all around the world. And so we really need to think about how that changes the threat environment. How does that change everything for everyone across the board? What do you think, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy year. I think it's been a crazy year for everyone. And, businesses that I think for a long time, digital transformation's been thrown around, and anyone who was waiting until March to start that journey was in for kind of a rough patch. But I think fortunately most businesses had started that lift and shift, is I think what some people refer to it as, is taking some processes and putting it out into the cloud providers, and looking to see where they can get benefits from having those types of technologies adopted. But what COVID-19 did was it really accelerated just the notion of how access patterns changed. And so for us, like as a company, we always talk about your attack surface and what does it mean to be online. And Benjamin, rightfully pointed out that just being on the internet, us being together right now in this webinar, is emitting signals that someone could use to, in theory, piece together an investigation or triangulate something. But when we talk about an attack surface for a business, moving over to these cloud providers or being forced to accommodate remote working from home, and doing that very quickly, it creates a lot of potential vulnerabilities. Just in terms of misconfigurations, bypassing of processes, etc. So I think for a lot of people, this has been a pretty chaotic year in making that migration. And I guess on the good note, anyone who was hesitant has now been forced to make this adoption. They probably realize it's not so bad. And anyone who had already begun that process is looking or taking the lessons learned and accelerating it further.
So when we think about this, we look at it in like 3 different buckets, or there are more buckets, but I'll look at it 3 buckets. Yeah, the folks that were pretty much ready, they pretty much adopted modern cloud infrastructure. They were ready to go. Everything kind of happens. And so everyone goes remote. They don't have any, legacy data centers or anything that they're dealing with. Everything's in AWS, GCP, whatever, name your cloud provider. And so they manage pretty well. But then you have the folks that were in transition. they might have had to escalated that project, and they're like, oh, we got to move faster. We have some stuff that's already up in the cloud, but we still have some legacy devices that we need to get moved over. And then you have the folks that were completely blindsided. So I know you work with a lot of folks like across the industry. For the folks that had to make that transition from these archaic infrastructures to brand new, spanking new cloud infrastructure, what kind of push and pull was that for them to get adopted in the cloud?
I think, unfortunately, no one really had the opportunity to probably architect it as best as they wanted. And so folks who were coming in from what I would say is maybe that legacy background, which happens to be a lot of people making the legacy to some cloud adoption. I don't think, unless you're starting like greenfield today, like the idea that you can just rebuild everything cloud native is a little bit of a farce. It's going to take a considerable amount of time to get applications rewritten or business processes codified and the logic done. But what we observed was just businesses doing the best they could to facilitate the work from home environment and trying to consume the intelligence that was being put out by public agencies, both within the United States, within Australia, really all over the world. We saw a unique situation this year where a lot of the vulnerabilities that typically come out aren't as prioritized for us. And I think a lot of people had the luxury of making the move over. Well, they were forced to move over. They didn't get the luxury of planning it, but they did get the luxury of having a lot of threat intelligence that was freely being published to help them guide their process and prioritize, okay, I just stood up a whole bunch of load balancers. Like, were those F5 load balancers? Like, oh, they were? Like, great, there's those things need to be patched right now because there's a new RCE vulnerability against them or something like that, right? So, I think businesses did the best that they could, but it's tough.
When you look at organizations shifting to these cloud services, like we're on the point of, you often think of the attack surface. In some cases, you might think that the attack surface is shrinking, and some may argue that you're actually increasing your attack surface because now you're hosting your data, applications, and user information in cloud services. And there's been a lot of shakeup in the news with acquisitions around attack surface management. What are some of the things that RiskIQ is doing when it comes to understanding the attack surface and shrinking that as far as possible?
Yeah, I mean, it's a unique opportunity for us. I think for the past 2 years we've been talking about attack surface, but and it's interesting when you're in kind of you're building out that industry, or you're building out that mindset. You kind of run through the different stages when you're talking to a buyer. And it's, there's a lot of education, and then it becomes like they've understood the problem, and it's finding like, who owns it ultimately to, complete acceptance. And like, then there's developed need, and someone goes and seeks out a solution. So you mentioned acquisitions. Palo Alto Networks recently acquired Expanse, who markets themselves as an attack surface management solution. They certainly are, but they were kind of later to the game than RiskIQ. And, I think both of us take that approach of an outsider's perspective of a business. So for us, we use the data that Benjamin talked about, all the petabytes of information we've collected over 10 years and the algorithms that are at our disposal to build out what an attack surface looks like. And I think what's been really interesting is Palo Alto's acquisition of Expanse really validates the space. It kind of creates that market more formally. And so, since that acquisition, even in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot more receptance and openness to what it means to have an attack surface, rallying behind this idea. And I think the pandemic drove this as well, that, man, I got a lot of assets online. I'm doing the best that I can to keep up with this, but I'm not actually sure what I own. And, as I shift more things out to the internet, to these cloud environments, it's imperative that I keep up with this, and I don't want to be left behind. I don't want to potentially suffer a breach. And that's where we've had a lot of customers, focusing. And fortunately, being a market leader in this particular space, we've long had many customers who've been with us for years who really leaned into that. So we've been able to learn from them and apply those best practices across the board.
And Brandon, it's also not just what do I own, but what do I rely upon as well. And like the assets that you might be using that a third party provides that you're using to run your business, and you need to know if that's secure or not as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, for us, like, you know, I recognize like this is kind of like a threat hunting workshop where we normally go through and kind of give demonstrations of like what someone can follow along. You know, I think it is helpful to kind of show a visual here as well. You know, from my side, just this is a product that most people don't typically see from RiskIQ, but I think, you know, illustrates the value in trying to understand what a business owns. And so this is our digital footprint product. I'm not in sales, but I think it's important that businesses today understand that solutions and technology exist to help find assets, whether they're deployed in the cloud or they remain inside your data centers. Excuse me. And beyond that, it can be used for a variety of different purposes. And our clients leverage it for risk, for vulnerability, for compliance, for governance, for security, as you would imagine. And what I'm showing here is just a digital footprint summary of a workspace we built out for the Department of Treasury. So Treasury has a number of organizations, you know, hundreds of thousands of assets here. And, you know, we build out these dashboards that are an intersection sometimes of just, you know, services that they're running or things that we see, potential exposures. But we also are able to map, you know, particular threat intelligence that we see within the market over top of it. In this particular case, I could click on this widget here and identify any NetScaler, you know, infrastructure that is within the Department of Treasury's footprint, and then actually go and decide how I want to action that as a business. And so, you know, I can see that this particular technology is running, why it's showing up inside the inventory, and get more details.
Yeah, one thing that I think about, I'm actually reminded of a conversation that Ron and I had a long time ago with our good friend Kmart. And we were sitting around, and he's a malware analyst, and we were talking about entropy, and we're talking about the use of DGA for nodes for botnets and things like that. And we were talking about it, and he said that as things start to expand, as those footprints start to expand, your entropy is only going to go up for a given organization. So that's something that's constantly going to happen. Would you agree with that? Do you think that we're in a stage now where there's no going back to simplifying for an organization, that things are only going to get more complicated and that attack surface is going to expand?
Yeah, I mean, we see it, right? You know, we have the capacity, as Benjamin kind of alluded to in some of our reference architecture. RiskIQ can be thought of as a big data company in a way. You know, working with petabytes of information puts us in a position where, you know, simply running a query across a MySQL table isn't really possible. You know, getting sub-second responses, you know, on a couple gigs of information isn't really a reality. So from our perspective, the way that our systems are architected is that they're constantly receiving terabytes of data per day, distilling down what has changed, what remains the same, and what has gone away. And, you know, effectively merging those and creating dashboards like this, where, you know, we can see just in, you know, yesterday or 2 days alone with the Treasury, you know, there was 115 pages added, 94 new SSL certificates, 240 IPs, et cetera. There's cases where it will go down, like things get removed or expired. But by and large, I fully anticipate that attack surfaces are going to continue to grow, especially for businesses that, you know, if we think about the three kind of ways that you've put it, Chris, you kind of have the legacy, you have hybrid, and then you have cloud native. If you're cloud native, I think it's a little bit easier to control or potentially automate some of that attack surface and constantly be in check, reducing it. But for most businesses, they're going to be stuck somewhere between legacy and hybrid. And most are, at this point in time, fully in hybrid. They're trying to figure out how just to lift and shift what they already have, or just you know, re-architect it to take advantage of these platforms. And so, yeah, I don't really see the complexity going away. I think that it's obviously aspirational, and it's going to be part of the journey, to try and do the reduction. And for that, like we try to provide scoring mechanisms to help group this. So, looking for websites that have insecure login forms. This is more of a hygiene-based issue, but it speaks to the complexity that it doesn't always have to be a remote code issue that could be a problem within your attack surface. It could be something almost regulatory, like having an HTTP or a lack of certificate where login information is there. But yeah, I don't necessarily see it going back to normal, which isn't a bad thing either, right? There's a lot of good that comes from these new platforms and the modern technology stacks. It's just going to take businesses time, upwards in just years of, trying to port over those processes and stay relevant.
The one thing is the good thing about what happened with the COVID issue is that the genie's out of the bottle. Like you said, it's not going back. We're on this journey, but it just kicked us in the butt and kicked us further down the road faster, and we have to run a little bit faster to catch up.
Right. The genie's definitely out of the bottle. And when I think of the genie being out of the bottle, I think of we're exposed to vulnerabilities in a different way. Like we traditionally had ports that were open that need to be closed down. We had attackers taking advantage of these opportunities, but now attackers are looking at things completely different. Like when I'm working with organizations and working at organizations that are kind of going towards the cloud native approach, the vulnerabilities turn into vulnerabilities of code and vulnerabilities of the ways that we're deploying things. I'm assuming that, with this type of platform, we have opportunities to also monitor vulnerabilities that aren't just infrastructure related and also code related. I saw the multiple login form that kind of made me believe that, but what else do we have in this dashboard?
I mean, for this particular dashboard, what we're looking at here is more of the attacker intelligence. So trying to overlay vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited. Given this is kind of a threat hunting workshop, I think it is important to kind of briefly cover this. But what we find, and the reason why most of you won't see this inside your interface literally at this moment today, is that if I try to go and, let's take a look here, expand this out. Most threat individuals or threat-centric folks are not going to necessarily care about how a particular organization is using cloud, or let's kind of pick the SSL example here. This kind of falls a little bit between like IT operations and security in some cases, and it's relevant information. It's pertinent, but it's not always what the threat intelligence team or security team focuses on. So we have the capacity for scanning the internet, for crawling the internet, for collecting metadata about assets and getting all that information. The same rich data that you see within Passive Total that aids in you conducting an investigation is also the same metadata that's associated to the assets and attack surfaces that we build out. And so a lot of information is here. You can kind of slice and dice it however you want, as you see, me just kind of combing through these dashboards. And, the one thing that we've started looking at when we were talking to our clients, and specifically people who attend workshops like this, and I recognize this one is different, is that it would be really helpful to get this information inside of an investigative platform. And, they don't need the inventory. They don't necessarily need, maybe the hygiene aspects, but they're going to want things around like attacker intelligence that helps them understand, of all the technologies that are deployed across my attack surface, which ones are potentially vulnerable, which ones are being exploited by, say, a nation state or a ransomware group right now, because ultimately that allows them as a security team to prioritize their efforts and actually go about making the changes. We talked about F5 here. If I kind of click on this little tile, we can see 716 IP addresses or pieces of infrastructure that are going to be connected to that particular technology, as identified through not only our mass scanning, so we were able to see the service, but our crawler was able to look at the page content and then ascertain that there was a F5 big IP access policy manager within the with somewhere within the actual page itself. So one of the things that we're looking to do, and this will be something that shows up either by the end of the year or sometime early next year, is take those kind of tiles that you just saw in the dashboard view and even some of this asset information and map that over to passive total. So when you're performing an investigation, you're going to start seeing this information about your business, the businesses that are supplying you or that you're dependent on, and eventually broadening this up so that every business is effectively mapped out inside our platform. And you can easily overlay threat intel on top of these types of inventories and drive your response program.
Yeah, it really becomes attack surface intelligence. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's super apparent that RiskIQ has a tremendous amount of data, and you're putting it to good use. How have you seen the attack surface using either the data or the research that you guys do to see the trends and how things are shifting in the environment today?
So the unique, I guess, perspective that we have is because it's this blended approach, right? Like, the struggle that RiskIQ, I think, has had in some ways is, having people see the intersect, like it was a lot of education around attack surface management. So you got an attack surface. Hey, you got a vuln program? What are you scanning? I'm scanning the inside. Why? Like, how are you finding things on the internet? Well, like we're cobbling it together with some open source. It's good enough. The issue that we've always had with attack surface management is this perception that a business actually knows they know everything that they have. And so it's always a difficult conversation to go to them and say, well, what if you're missing 20 to 30% of that? You got to get through that initial hurdle. What's excited me, I guess, about the acquisition by Palo Alto, again, is it sort of validates that attack surface management space more broadly. And again, like we're doing less educating, we're getting more people to us. But to your question around trends, for us, the trends that we see are kind of twofold. Like we're able to see attack surfaces change across all of the businesses. They don't have to be customers of ours. The way the technology works is it's not an agent. It doesn't require any interaction. It builds out the attack surface and then maps it all and puts it in one spot. But then we also see the trends of attacks that are taking place and new vulnerabilities that are coming out. And we're probably so we're putting trending information on industries and their attack surface and how they evolve. We're putting trending information on what we're seeing in the threat intel space and how actors are evolving. Ransomware. How they're changing, how nation states are adapting to this new environment. And where we're really focused on for next year is how do we blend both of those two together? And that kind of got to that point where, let's merge some of that attack surface understanding directly within the investigative platform. So you, as a responder, as an analyst, as you're conducting your investigation and building out the attack surface of the adversary, you're able to understand what organizations are potentially impacted by that and how they connect together to each other.
So if you think about it, if an article came out, open source intelligence or about a vulnerability or an attack, how nice would it be to look at that list and we already know your attack surface to say, oh, these are the ones that are relevant and actionable for you that you need to take action on. So out of all that noise, the 100 articles that come out every day and seeing the top 3 that you really need to read so you don't miss it. And then you know exactly where it is in your organization that you have the problem.
Yeah.
When you mentioned,
Sorry, Ron. Really quickly before we move on, we've gotten to several themes of questions coming in from the audience that I'd like to throw out there really quickly. Brandon, you were talking about attack surface. Do you capture attacks against the attack surface or just exposures and risks pre-attack?
We do get some information about attacks that are coming inbound or probes that are coming into the attack surface itself. And there will be future capabilities that will be released in our investigative platform that speak more directly to our ability to observe inbound attacks to an attack surface. So I recognize that's vague, but And I know some of the capabilities that we're releasing. I literally do not know if I can mention them yet, so I will not do so to avoid getting product yelling at me.
You'll be happy. We'll just say you'll be happy.
Yeah, we put a lot of time and effort into recognizing that like having the outside perspective is good, but being able to then prioritize those exposures to the ones that are maybe getting traffic sent to them and types of traffic that could net some sort of indication of exploitation. We know that helps teams really make the necessary changes that they need to more quickly.
Gotcha. Very cool. And
Not
we
yet.
actually had a few people ask about the crawler and how the crawler works. Is that scanning me, attackers, others? What?
Everything.
Everything, yeah.
It's genericized, it's scaled out horizontally, executes billions of HTTP requests per day. And our general philosophy is try to gain as much intelligence as possible. So the crawler itself will go and it'll crawl our customers, it'll crawl, newly observed domains that we've picked up either by whois or passive DNS. We'll do DNS zone transfers and crawl those pages. We'll look for, let's say NGOs or civil society that are often targeted by nation state actors, specifically around web compromises, and we'll crawl those. We go as far as crawling down all the way to the individual asset resources, say JavaScript or CSS as well, in an effort to identify any sort of changes that exist there. And all of that data from the crawlers effectively pass through our data pipelines, which then can be instrumented with detection signatures. So that allows us to do things like identify mage cart, within e-commerce websites, the JavaScript changed. Not only did we see it, we also were able to kind of use a signature to detect that it was associated to a particular malicious group. All the things.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. I jumped in there, but I'll hand it back to Ron.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of expand on what Benjamin was speaking about of having actionable intelligence. And I think you can only really get to actionable intelligence if you have a plan or some type of framework that is going to lead you to that plan. My good friend Chris over here, he did create a framework that I use personally and that we've created courses on and that we've even spoken many times to RiskIQ about. It's the EASY framework. I would love to pass it over to you, Chris, since you've created it.
All right, yeah. So, the EASY framework came about because I'd spent a lot of time building threat intelligence capabilities, assessing threat intel programs and teams, and really 85% of my advice could be boiled down to really 4 points, and created a nice little cute acronym for it. E is elicit requirements, because that's the foundation of any intelligence program. You can't, produce intelligence without having requirements, because you have stakeholders in intelligence. You're wanting to supply that information to folks that are going to need that information to do their mission. And then A is assess your collection plan. Right now we're talking about, things beyond the firewall, right? So both internal and external to your company, what is the information that you're going to need to do your mission, make decisions based on risk, and move the needle of intelligence in your security posture. S is strive for impact. So talking about that security posture, fixing those holes, making decisions to make make the company more safe, or enable the company to push into innovation and risk a bit more. One of the things I like to talk about is this Formula One analogy. Formula One is the racing where they had the funny looking cars, and I didn't know anything about Formula One for a long time, up until Netflix came out with that Drive to Survive special. And it's a unique sport. You have these machines that cost millions of dollars. You have these drivers that are vying for these very few slots. There's very few Formula One drivers out there, and so you have to be at the top of your game at all times. And in the pit, you have people that are putting on the wheels and helping with the mechanics, but you also have people that are looking at the gauges and the charts Like how much tire tread is coming off the tires? Are you out of alignment? Is the engine running hot? So those people in the pit, they're telling the driver how hard they can push the car into that risk. How hard can they push that car into the next position, or even into that first position to win the race? And that's what we do as cybersecurity professionals, is we enable the business and business units to make decisions to push into innovation, to push into that risk, so they can go as fast and as innovative as they possibly can. And then finally yield the feedback. That, you know, you don't get better without feedback in anything that you do. If you're playing chess, there's automatic feedback. You just lost a piece. If you're playing a sport, you lose a point, or maybe you get a penalty. So feedback is important even in threat intelligence. So always like try and get better. Even as people, we try to get better every day. I don't compete against Ron. I don't compete against Brennan or Benjamin. I compete against myself from yesterday. As long as I'm 1% better, that's what's important. So when it comes to your threat intelligence program, being better than yesterday is all you can ever ask for. And so feedback and metrics is how you get there. So that's the easy framework, and that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
You're absolutely right. So like when we do investigations, when we're done, we go back and look to see, is there a smoking gun? Was there something in there that if we would have known this ahead of time, we could have illuminated the whole thing, the whole infrastructure? And some of our data sets that we've created were from that specifically, like cookies, for example, or SSL certificates, from looking to see that one piece and then being able to go back in time and set that indicator and bring it forward to the beginning and create those data sets. That's how some of these things came about, is from the yielding to feedback to say, how can we make this better?
Hey, well, Benjamin, so it's interesting, right? Like that this is sort of the retrospect. You know, what investigation, like having put together a lot of these like demos and like recognizing I did some of the early ones, like I felt we were on the bleeding edge at the time using like SSL certificates or cookies to track actors. I mean, I think history has proven that we were pretty far ahead here to the general analyst audience. But what are you seeing now when you conduct these classes? And like, you know, you mentioned that like WHOIS was impacted by GDPR, and as an analyst, it upsets me that WHOIS is gone. But you know, as someone who's now more privacy focused, I actually like GDPR in ways because it does provide me a means to protect my information. So, you know, what are you seeing from an investigative standpoint in the demos you guys put together, and what you hear from folks who attend the class?
The biggest thing that we see is a lot of times people are reactive. They see something, then they can investigate and find something, but they're not so much proactive in their hunting because they're not experienced with it, because they're not used to what's available to piece everything together. So what I see now is the hunting is going for the more reactive, like I have the incident, let me go find something and then come back and see if there's anything more. It's now, I know my infrastructure, I want to look at it and I want to see if anybody is duplicating it, using it, and then finding the threat actor from that known good piece. So examining the good and finding something bad that's leveraging that good infrastructure. I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen over these workshops I've done over the years. That's what the light bulb goes off in people's minds, where now they can start looking and being proactive and say, okay, I can find something that we maybe haven't detected yet, or that's being set up for an attack that we're going to find. I think that's the biggest thing we found.
Yeah. And so a concrete example of that, I'm like racking my brain for one that's relevant, would be maybe like a Dropbox scam or a PayPal scam, where all of a sudden, you know, they copy like the login page from PayPal, they change out the login form, but they, you know, I think when we did this before, like Google Analytic ID, they kept the same.
Correct.
Right? So you can then pivot on a Google Analytic ID from PayPal and find thousands of other pieces of infrastructure, often newly registered, that are being actively used inside of attacks.
Right. So they're duplicating the infrastructure, and they're duplicating the little bits of codes, the cookies or the trackers in their infrastructure, because the tools are just copying everything. And right. From that, you find the bad stuff.
And mark of the web, right? Too, yeah, right? Is that still a thing? Yeah.
Yeah, and HTT track, but the big thing is that as threat investigators, marketing is usually the one that keep track of those Google Analytic codes and things. They go, you don't need it. It's for user experience. But those pieces that are in other departments that you don't have access to because of separation of duty, it's in this product that you can see it and you can leverage it and find these things that otherwise you would have never known about.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of a good segue over to us focusing a little bit more on the threat intel side. Like covered a bit of the attack surface, and I kind of documented or talked about things that you guys don't get access to unless you pay us money yet. So it is changing there. Keep an eye out for that. But yeah, let's flip over to the threat intel side, and it's been a pretty active year. Again, like COVID sort of changed the situation. Like the attack surface has expanded, it's become more prominent, but also there's like a ton of stuff going on in the industry. Like, is there anything for, I guess, Chris and Ron, that you guys, in talking with everyone you speak about or speak with in the industry, was there any sort of like events that were pretty interesting or potentially fueled by coronavirus or just the pandemic that were interesting, I guess, like a trend in an attack or something new?
Yeah, I think in the beginning you saw a lot of actors. I guess the high-end actors, it seems like they tried to stay away from using COVID as a means to get into the industry. And then it seemed like maybe 2 or 3 months in, everyone just started using it as a mechanism to get into everyone's inbox. So, and I guess it really depends on who your threat actor is, but they have used it as a means for phishing, to get into folks' inbox, get everybody, using that fear tactic that attackers like to use. Like, everyone for a long time, like I know in my house, we listen to the news every single day. I've never listened to the news as much in my entire life. And so that everyone is curious about the situation. They want to know what's going on. They want to know if things are getting better. Are things getting worse? Is things getting worse in my area? And so you have attackers that use that fear to get folks to do something that they might not normally do. Maybe they won't click that link in the news because I don't watch the news. But when you use something that everyone's interested in, that's when the freaks come out at night.
So Chris, that's a great segue, because what happened was we had a customer that said, hey, we have people all over the world and we have COVID out. We don't know what schools are closing, what lockdowns are going to happen. Can you give us a consolidated report and tell us what's happening so we get the facts? So we did this for this one customer, and then we said, we need to do this for everybody. We need to broaden this out. So we actually had the daily COVID report that went out, and our threat analysts went through and looked at what the facts were. So then there wasn't that fear. So you had one place that you can go and find out what was really happening around the world to say, especially like in the US, this is what's happening in every state. This is what the numbers were. This is the schools that are closed. This is what the lockdown. And we did that daily to help the industry. And that was something that we did like 24/7 for months.
Wow.
Yeah, with infrastructure too. It's kind of like the situational awareness of COVID in the industry. It's definitely like a taxing task for the team involved there, but felt it was important to get that information out there for the general public, given our visibility into infrastructure and what happens online.
And you have to remember that we have direct observations. What we're doing, it's like we really saw this. It's not like, oh, we think this is going to happen, or this is what the TTPs that the actors are using, but we can tell you, oh no, this is what we saw, and you have this, so it's relevant and actionable. So that's what we tried to do for COVID and for other things, is to really show you those direct observations.
I think it's interesting, right? Because small community, but my brother happens to be in incident response. He worked for the Crypsis group, also now acquired by Palo Alto. But it was interesting. Like you can imagine our conversations. At the virtual holiday meal, so to speak.
Right.
And the one thing that was apparent to me in speaking with him was, and it does go back a little bit to the attack surface, and I'm not intentionally doing this, but it just happens to be the case. For him, the biggest thing that he was responding to constantly was ransomware.
Yep.
And I know ransomware was a thing like before the pandemic, but there was a special circumstance that of the broadening of the attack surface and those weak links of operating on the internet that seem to be really impacting these businesses. I mean, like I'm a big fitness person, and Garmin went down for who knows how many days, and I was losing my mind. I was like, what the hell's happening here? Like, where is my data gone? Like, that's years of data that I just spent tracking.
Right.
How am I going to hit my goals? But in all seriousness, like the ransomware seemed to impact everyone, and he's not able to discuss any details with me, but what it was clear from talking not only with him but just others, partners that we have who respond to these incidents, that there was a lot more than what was being publicly reported. That there's a number of businesses, and I think recently came out. I don't want to pick on the Asia Pacific region, but I believe a lot of the businesses in that particular region actually pay the ransoms. And that's going against the guidance from the United States and other agencies we have here. But yeah, that was kind of an eye opener for me. Was I knew that this was a threat, I knew it was a problem. I didn't realize the what would happen when you expand your attack surface. You're also trying to keep the business online, and now like the threats are taking very much advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Absolutely.
really interesting.
And when you think of that, especially ransomware and all of the things that come with it. So Chris mentioned these attacks could have started by phishing. That's a great attack vector, just to land in someone's email, talk about COVID, and then somehow get an executable on their device to encrypt all their files and sensitive data. But it also makes you wonder, where does intelligence begin and where does it end? And, is it just the IOCs? Is it just the actors? What are you all's perspectives on like where intelligence really ends and what is the limit of it?
Well, yeah, it certainly doesn't end, or it certainly doesn't begin in IOCs, in my opinion. Sure Chris could agree with that as well. Like from a
I think IOCs are the end all be all. That's all you ever need. You don't need anything else. Behavior schmavers.
Oh God, how did we get here? No, but I mean, like, I was in the, primary intelligence requirements. It's like this. It's knowing, it's like building out that, and so it's defining your requirements. You have to do it. So I mean, it starts more holistically about the business and gaining some sense of situational awareness. So understanding what is out there and what's happening, and then of course, like there's a million things happening all the time. So if you have the team and the staff in order to understand what's occurring at all times, how might the protests be weaponized? How might this election cycle or previous election cycle be weaponized? There's a number of current events that drive attacks or attackers to do things. And then you also have to, but recognizing you can't boil the ocean, you got to sort of tone that back to some degree and figure out what's most important to me. And so, defining those requirements, using kind of the easy framework as you talked about, Chris, helps drive towards that. Where does it begin? In my opinion, it begins in situational awareness and defining requirements. There was, we talked about ransomware, and one that was relatively recent was the RiskIQ actors literally, pointing out that they were going to go and target hospitals, right? Like this is bizarre to me. I mean, like, why bother to telegraph what you're going to do? It seems odd, but they've been successful nonetheless. And that's a case where if you were simply relying on IOCs, you kind of be left in the dark, and you might be responding to an incident, wishing you had IOCs and wishing you knew that they announced this. So I think having dark web, visibility, understanding your requirements, understanding your business and the operating, like what you need to understand, who might attack you, is probably the starting point. And then the end point is, I don't know, I kind of go back to what Chris said, it's feedback. right? Like, it could be IOCs, but it doesn't end there. Just because you're responding and you find some malicious material, it doesn't mean that it's over. The internet changes all the time. The attack surface changes. Like, the adversaries change, and so it's a consistent feedback loop of, reinforcing that situational awareness and technical bits and running it through its cycle.
Yeah, when you talk about like the threat actor, once we publish, we burn their infrastructure. They move on.
Yeah, I'm
the
gonna bring
IOCs
it
are
up
going
right
to change.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the pieces that you have to understand the actor. You have to understand what they do, and you have to track them. So we actually track some of these threat actors, so we understand what's happening, so we can find them, and then we publish when we need to tell the world.
So bringing up the Google Chrome here. Yeah, so that was an interesting case. It was pretty cool too to see the industry rally around this. So if I go into our community edition and I search for RiskIQ here, what's going to happen is we're aggregating a bunch of open source intelligence, but we're also producing our own intelligence as well. So you can see that I believe Threat Connect, FireEye, a number of businesses really rallied to kind of burn these guys' infrastructure. RiskIQ was one of them as well. So this is about a month ago. And basically published this information out here, and then effectively 2,000 some indicators on the infrastructure related to the actors themselves. And so where does it begin? In some cases, if you're looking for RiskIQ, you can come into our platform and gain some of that situational awareness. But it shouldn't end there. Like, if there is hard indicators or pieces of technical evidence that are available to you as a responder, you should probably make use of this and find ways, especially if it overlaps with your requirements, that you're a hospital, you should be taking in things like this and trying to consume it and ensure that you're doing the best you possibly can to block these attacks.
And we updated. The one thing is, when we first published, there was like 1,500, and then we recently updated. So we're constantly going back and looking at these as well.
Yeah, I just clicked into one of these here, and anyone's able to follow along with this example. But we have all of our data sets at the bottom, and our threat research team was able to kind of identify these because they look at the actors, they look at the TTPs, they look at how past incidents can inform future incidents, and they stitch all these indicators together. And as Benjamin said, like, it's not static. The actor continues to evolve, and so we make sure to keep those updated. And anyone who wants to can choose to monitor this particular infrastructure in a project within the platform, and effectively get alerted to any changes that take place over time. So it's an interesting case, like to be able to grab that information and get the situational awareness from our platform, and then also be able to actually go and investigate it, make the connections yourselves. And I would say and encourage you to do that. Our research team is great, but there's a million different actors and a million different things going on. And the best source of intelligence sometimes is your own business and your own team. So I would encourage you to use the tools at your disposal, make use of these promo codes. Like, we run these events all the time, and try to do your own investigation, build out additional indicators of compromise that you may want to look into further. And if you're kind of relatively new to the game, start with one of these articles, and use the indicators that are published there. The story is already delivered to you in a narrative format, and the indicators are already associated, so you don't the hard work's effectively done. So if you're looking to learn, it's a great opportunity to start with a direct piece of evidence, and then pivot directly right over into this hard technical data.
So the other thing is, you can download these as well. So you can, if you had an internal system that you wanted to run those indicators through, you can download all of them and suck them in and find out if anybody's communicating with them.
Very cool. One thing I wanted to ask is, when you think about threats, you think about a threat landscape. And there's different types of threat landscapes with varying degrees of relevancy, right? You have the big threat landscape, what's going on at the global level. And then you look at what's going on in my industry, because something that's attacking a sister organization or a competitor might come my way next. And then you also look kind of what you were just talking about, Brandon, is what's the data that, or the attacks that we're seeing, and how are we using that information? So what do you think organizations need to be thinking about from a threat landscape perspective at all those three levels?
Yeah, I think they need to think about what's most likely to impact them. So it's about setting the requirements about what's most likely to target, the business based on where they're operating, the work that they do. And then of course, you can't always predict what's going to happen. And so this just adds more value to understand your attack surface. I realize it's like cyclical and or circular in a way, and it kind of comes back to our terms, but it really does function that way. If you don't know what you have on the internet and you've deployed a bunch of systems and they're not managed, and like that is the source of your compromise, it doesn't matter what requirements you defined, because you didn't know that that actually occurred. And so now they've pivoted inside of your business and you're reacting to that situation. Great, you've already lost. So I think it starts with like yourself, and then once you have a good understanding of that, it broadens up to the dependencies and vendors. So like folks within your supply chain. I think that a lot of businesses, from what we've seen, they can use the procurement cycle or the fact that there is a business relationship to kind of enforce security on their vendors. The financial sector is heavily regulated. They're a good example of this. In order to do business with them, you have to pass certain audits. You have to have demonstrated like certain security capabilities. I think that those things are only likely to increase over the coming years, especially as we get to a different version of an attack surface through these cloud native platforms.
So Chris, if you think of like the strategic, tactical, and operational types of intelligence, the strategic is more of like I like to think of it like the weather. So you have like, this year we're going to have a lot more hurricanes, and then the tactical is more like this. We think that the storm's going to hit somewhere on the Gulf Coast of Mexico for the next 14 days, and then they get into the operational, go, it's going to hit 3 days from now in Galveston. So when we look at the internet, we see the trends, and that's our strategic, and that's our what we see, what the threat actors are doing, and like Roku, what we saw happening, and we saw that before it was published, and then we published it. We were ready to like helping our customers and doing it and mapping them out, and then articles started coming out and we published.
Benjamin, I know, I don't mean to interrupt you. Did you say Roku?
Yeah.
I just
Roku under the
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
It's going to be on the news tomorrow.
Oh my God, we got to clear the record right now. Roku did nothing wrong.
No, sorry. I'm sorry. So thank you for calling me out on that. Thank you. So when we look at these direct observations, we're able then to see the attacks against others, and then say you have those types of vulnerabilities because you directly have those, because we've mapped the internet already. And then the operational piece comes in I would think with the integrations that we have with the inside and the outside to say, no, this is really happening now in your environment. So this could be something like with Microsoft, with Splunk, with CrowdStrike, to be able to tell you that the operational thing, like, no, this is really happening in your environment today. So that's where I see that things are going, to get the relevant and actionable direct observational intelligence. Yeah.
It kind of wears me out to hear about all of the things that we have to do. And I've seen organizations grow a security team and hire a bunch of people to try to keep track of everything. But I think that it's becoming a little unfeasible to do that, to just throw more people at the problem, to throw all these plans at the problem. At some point, we have to kind of invent and start to create our own solutions. And you all have created a solution that really integrates well with products. I've used Passive Total quite a bit. But one of the things that I've really leveraged over my career is automation. I've realized that I, as an analyst, can only do so many things. And using automation, I can take my knowledge, my tradecraft, my wisdom, and start to apply that wisdom to other solutions and technologies to take some of the load off of myself and my team. What are some of the things that you all have done when it comes to from threat intelligence and automation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like, the platform itself is still very much like centric around someone wanting to conduct an investigation manually. I don't think there's any problem with that. It takes a lot of like intuition and understanding to kind of stitch together the attack surface of an adversary. But like what you key in on is like it's just not enough time to do it. So the initial foray into the threat intelligence portal that I kind of showed with the not Roku but Ryuk articles was sort of like one way of speeding that up, right? Like now you have a narrative. I don't have to think about it. So I'm not reading a report somewhere, downloading the PDF, looking at the bits, and then like trying to take the IOCs out of that and then individually search it. So like we removed a lot of those steps and we automated, like, look, it's just delivered here now. Research is delivered here with a narrative, and context around the IOC is delivered right in front of you. Good. We don't want to stop there. We want to kind of move to the next step. And the next logical step is the same way that we're able to build out a digital footprint or an attack surface for a business, we should be able to apply that same thing for an adversary. And so that is something that we're actively working on within the business itself. That will be another releasable item in the early of next year, is more services around the automation of building out the attacker infrastructure. And so as an analyst, instead of having to go and do all those manual pivots, much like we do in the threat hunting workshop, we'll be able to give one indicator and immediately do all the pivots behind the scenes, apply a bunch of rules and kind of analyst views, if you will, kind of like an expert system, and return back a mound of different artifacts and things that are related to the threat actor, along with a profile and more details about maybe the vulnerabilities they've exploited and the toolkits that they've used. So next year we'll see a considerable amount of that. Something that is in the platform today that I could show, that I know that some people have kind of keyed in on, I've seen it in Twitter, is the notion that like not only can you search for organizations or actor names, you could also search for toolkits or other things that get leveraged as well. So Cobalt Strike, popular kind of tool that's sort of abused for malicious purposes. If you go and type that into our system, you're going to get back 835 results in this particular case, like IP addresses that are related to Cobalt Strike. And one of the things that we're doing, so Benjamin outlined how we collect all this data, and I sort of mentioned how the terabytes of information flow over a detection pipeline. Well, our research team is able to build signatures that say, this is Cobalt Strike, or this looks like a command and control server based on the traffic, based on the ports that are open, based on the banner information, based on the web page content. And so they're releasing those out as what we call components. So you can search for Cobalt Strike today. I believe PlugX is another one that's available here, where you can kind of search for infrastructure related to that. I'm just kind of curious myself to see if this does anything different. But PlugX being kind of associated with the Chinese kind of malware used by nation states. So that's, here we go. These types of components you'll see here. So this is a case where we're mapping it out as a command and control server. So you can sort of see that category. And these are, 336 pieces of infrastructure associated with PlugX. So someone asked, are we going to be able to detect attacks coming against the attack surface? The answer is yes. in varying degrees. It's a difficult problem to solve. But more importantly, like as Benjamin alluded to, this information you can download from our platform immediately today and go put it inside your system. So you could take these 336 command and controls, and if you see any egress traffic out to this infrastructure, well, you kind of pretty much know that you might be dealing with a compromise from a nation state using the plugx variant. So I think that's kind of the direction that we're going into. And what's most exciting is I see all of our internal weekly detection, get shared out. Benjamin and I get to see that. You guys don't get the luxury, but eventually this will kind of get more published on a routine basis through our platform. But we're finding things like SCADA systems, IoT devices, you name it, it's showing up. So that to me helps automate, the attacker side, also helps automate the visibility as well.
I love that. When you think about automation, you think about the precursor to automation and even detection logic, and that's threat hunting. The way we kind of look at it, and I'd love to hear both Benjamin and Brandon your thoughts as well, is that there's kind of two types of threat hunting. There's threat hunting internal to your organization. So you're looking for the things that your traditional solutions aren't catching. So you're looking for that visibility, you're forming your hypothesis of what this might look like. And eventually you hope to get to, some detection logic, which is automated. And then you have like external threat hunting, right? So building out research of what attacker infrastructure looks like, right? Do you see that in two different paradigms, or do you see that all as one function of threat hunting?
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I guess I see it as maybe it's an evolution of threat hunting. Is that you have to kind of evolve to go to the outside. I think the issue that hurts the industry at the moment is that there's not a lot of tooling to help aid in that process, right? Like discovery remains one of the hardest issues to solve. Like when I look across the market landscape, ironically enough, when we present someone a digital footprint, or like as I kind of brought up here, the Department of Treasury, we almost often start within the workspace itself when we say, here's everything you own. Okay. And the person goes, they have to in some ways be convinced that they own it all. But what we often ignore is, and never do it justice, like I always kick myself when I do this, but is the discovery part. If you go and ask someone, how do you discover, what's out there on the internet today? Shodan comes up, Census comes up, all these other kind of like disparate tools that are leveraged. And I think they are great, but they don't stitch together like the story, right? They're just like individual pieces of information. So I do think that threat hunting needs to evolve, but I also believe the tool set needs to evolve as well. It's kind of like what I was saying. If someone gives us an indicator, like we should be able to build out that attack surface of the adversary automatically using all the data that we have. I anticipate that more businesses will do that, especially that are in our space.
So one thing I want to mention, when you look at some of the other tools out there, they're IP focused. And if you're IP focused, you're looking for a port and a protocol associated with that IP and making a determination of what it is. We're going in deeper and saying that this component is on that port, on that IP, on that domain, and linking that together. The other ones are looking at the IPs and then looking at some flow data and saying there's correlation between these, where we're actually seeing through the web interface and how the host pairs, what's going in and out of every website, image coming from here, Google Analytics going there, and mapping that out completely, getting the full picture of what's there. Just looking at the other data, you're missing quite a bit and not understanding the full stack of what you're running and what's there. So it's a lot more comprehensive and giving you that visibility so you can really look at those scenarios and see what's happening. When I ran security for a financial services company, we ran 30% of the credit reports for the nation based in Powell, California. But with that, we always were worried that someone could walk out to the break room, the lunchroom, and go take a USB and send credit reports out or social security numbers out, because we locked down the workstation, but in the cafeteria, there was a place where someone can check their email. So when data leak prevention products, I wanted to find something. So when we demoed and tried and implemented data leak prevention while they were still in, beta with organizations, because we would think about the scenarios and say, how would I steal data? Well, you're being monitored here, but not here. Let's do it. So the threat hunters have to really put on the black hat sometimes and say, if I was going to do something, how would I do it? And then that will give you the ability then to see what you need to collect, what you need to analyze to not only protect from the inside, but the outside. And you need that visibility on the outside, because you can't determine what's happening unless you know what's happening outside. You have control on the inside. You have nothing on the outside. So we're like the SIM on the internet. So think of it that way. We have all that data and we have that information, so we can merge that together to extend what you did on the inside, but make it to the world.
Yeah, kind of like Roku.
There, that's it. That's my nickname.
Not for the rest of it. That's a new nickname.
He's going to send me a box. I'm going to get a shirt, stickers.
Yeah,
the
the tattoo. Don't
they give away money? Isn't that their whole like shtick? Oh no, that's not. Is that Roku? I digress. It's like a commercial where they like have you try and pronounce the company, and then they give you money if you get it. That's Ramatan or Rakuten. Oh my God.
But when you think about like where we're heading, it's to give you the visibility and control to take action, whether it's on your infrastructure or somebody else's. You can't make a good decision without having all the facts: the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So we're trying to give you all those facts, and then to automate it to the point where you can say, is it good or bad? Is it something that affects me or doesn't? So then you can leverage your time, because that's the commodity that you don't have that much of, to be able to make those determinations. So if we can level set it where we can bring those hard things that you would normally do yourself down lower in the stack to somebody that's more junior. That frees you up to do those other detailed investigations and to be able to quickly know if something's good or not. So you can have the automation automatically know this is bad. Okay, take this action, do this, then alert me when it's done and it's corrected. That's where we're trying to get to.
Yeah. So, thinking about like all that, Benjamin, like that, I think you kind of touch on like what we try to achieve as a company.
Yeah.
Like that's what we want to do. I'm curious, like, again, Chris, Ron, you guys talk to a lot of folks, like, is there any sort of like, I have to imagine there's fatigue, right? Ron, you mentioned it, that was kind of the desire around automation. Like, where are those sources of fatigue come from? Is it just like the alerts that come up? Is it the constant work? Like, is it the tools? Is it all the things? Like, give me a sense of, from your guys' perspective, like what you're hearing today.
I think it's a combination of all the things. So in one aspect, you have alerts that are constantly coming in, and you have to do research on those alerts. You have to ultimately triage those alerts and then respond to those alerts. And if those alerts are of high severity and require a lot of follow-up action, then you might even have to write a report. And before you finish that first report, boom, here's another alert. And it's kind of a perpetual cycle. And a lot of the times you're doing the same things over and over and over again. And that's kind of why I touched on automation. But, I think one of the things that really eases analysts and alert fatigue is integrations. So not having to go to so many places when you're going to be pulling the repetitive information. So I think APIs have done a great job at pulling this all together and allowing organizations and users to start pooling their data into maybe not a single place, but multiple places, fewer places, and reducing that alert fatigue.
Yeah, and that that kind of so my role inside of the business today is really fostering that aspect. Like one of the big things that we've learned from clients is in some cases, or many cases, we're not a SIM, right? Like Benjamin expresses us maybe the SIM for the internet, but we're certainly not a SIM of choice for any sort of business. And if we are, then that's a little concerning to me, right? But all that said, like some businesses will rely on us for analyst-based work and investigations. I think that's where we shine, and providing situational awareness. But when it comes to SIM, EDR, SOAR platforms, etc., like that's not our wheelhouse. So that's kind of the area that I run these days, which is trying to take like this security intelligence message of making the people, the department, the team, the business as a whole smarter, and taking all that information that Benjamin was talking about, like the visibility that we provide on the attack surface, the prioritization around maybe what to patch or go after, the situational awareness around an actor, and disseminating that into as many solutions as possible. And it's been a busy year doing that sort of work. We've put out integrations with CrowdStrike, with Splunk, with Palo Alto, upgraded stuff that we did with ServiceNow and some other partners. And it's, to me, that's in the partner ecosystem, it has two folds on the benefit. One, we get to strike up relationships with these larger companies, like let's say a Microsoft. And two, we get to actually facilitate delivering value to our clients, even if it's not directly within our product. I'll show just a quick example here of one of them that I wrote. It's very rare that these days that I'm writing code for the moment. This is with Microsoft. So we have all this information available to us, and this is kind of Sentinel for anyone who hasn't seen it. And Sentinel is just the kind of cloud native SIM within the Azure environment. And one of the things that we wanted to do was bring our data into Sentinel. And what's pretty cool is they have this notion of playbooks. So if you think about Palo Alto and Demisto and Splunk and Phantom, Microsoft learned from that to some extent and created their own playbook logic that we can kind of go and investigate. But we have these incidents here, and we can look at an incident and essentially see what pieces of infrastructure are associated with it. This is obviously just a toy example. If I want to go and view the full details here, I can do so. But one of the neat things that makes this powerful is not its SIM-like functionality. It's the playbooks being paired with it. So I can view playbooks that I could run up against this particular event. So I'm going to go and do a full enrichment with RiskIQ data. And I can see here, as that playbook is running, we can see that it's running. So it's succeeded. This is going to give us insight into the actual playbook itself. So it takes information from the alert in Sentinel, goes and pulls out any IP addresses, and goes and gets information from RiskIQ in an automated fashion. Of course, I pick a bad example, pick another one. Here we go. So in this case, any cookies that were associated with this particular IP, and then it has some follow-on actions where we go and actually add a comment back to the incident. So this view is not, this is more the diagnostic view. But if I go back over to the incident, I view the comments here and refresh this, what you're going to see is RiskIQ was able to annotate through, the multiple different data sets that we have, whether there was some additional telemetry around this particular infrastructure. And so if I were to click on this, I can then go and investigate it further. And with these playbooks, what we did was we made them sparse in some cases where it's providing summary detail. In other cases, it's providing the full data context directly within the system. And it gives analysts who are using Sentinel the relevant internet data and then the ability to kind of pivot over and conduct a more deeper investigation. And of course, this is an example that I used with CrowdStrike as well. So I pivot over into our platform. We can see some CrowdStrike labels up top. And then if you're a CrowdStrike user, you'll see this CrowdStrike tab here. And what we do is we'll pull in endpoint information that have communicated with this particular infrastructure, and then any Falcon X intelligence that is on top of that as well. And so as you can imagine, completely different from a SIM use case, being able to service the endpoint directly from my investigative platform allows me to accelerate my investigation and ensure that I've completely gone through and really took advantage of that. That's been my year, is writing these and trying to provide as much value for RiskIQ clients through our partners and other solutions, because we recognize security intelligence isn't all that great if you can't take advantage of it in your existing investments. People aren't just going to go throw out everything and go adopt the cloud. That would be awesome, but business doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and the one thing was we did a workshop with CrowdStrike, and then what we did there, Brendan from CrowdStrike, not Brandon, but Brendan wrote some really cool scripts, because once you find a hit on something, you create a project, you add all of your indicators in there. The next thing is you have to go back in and see, do I have any new detections? Because you found this new infrastructure. So he wrote some scripts to take it back in and find new detections, and then make new alerts. So that iterative process. So bridging those two things together with the automation is just wonderful for the investigator.
Yeah, I know we're getting closer on time, but one thing I wanted to mention when it comes to automation and some of the things that you leveraged just in that presentation there, Brandon, is that if you listen to our show, that we talk about how the cybersecurity professional is that mental athlete with no off season. You're constantly having to make decisions, make decisions based on incidents, make decisions based on information that you have, the information you don't have, decisions based on who you're going to use as a vendor. Do they have the right juice to be able to solve the problems that you have? There's so many things that you have to decide as a cybersecurity professional, and all the things that you don't have to decide, it's just like, thank you. Bringing that data together with CrowdStrike, bringing data from internal sources and marrying them up with external sources so that the analysts don't have to do that is unbelievably helpful. So I would like to hear from your perspective, and I know you can't dip into the secret juice that you're going to reveal next year, but what does that look like for the future? What do we think we're eventually going to get to from an automation and pivoting and data enrichment perspective?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, like I can speak some to the future here. Like the enrichment, I think we've saturated quite well. Like we're gonna make sure that our data is kind of in any platform it needs to be, and we'll expand, based on what our customers are asking of us, and where we see common technologies come up or new market leaders emerge. But I think, to go back to the same broken record here, it's the attack surface bits. Like we do have APIs associated with that, and now I think has been the right time to get that inside of a lot of these businesses. What does it mean for a CrowdStrike installation if I can union, your endpoint install with your attack surface? All of a sudden, I can identify gaps in your endpoint telemetry. What does it mean if, I'm a Microsoft and I want to get more workloads into Azure? How can I leverage the attack surface information to understand, workloads that are maybe in a traditional data center or GCP or AWS, and sell the customer on security because Azure maybe adds more security features or something along those lines. Or, within Palo Alto Networks, we just released, 3 parts of our solution, digital footprint, passive total, in our intelligence feeds within XSOAR. So if you want to go and automatically remediate problems that come up in your attack surface, that's absolutely possible. We're able to kind of highlight changes to your attack surface, whether or not it's an asset, who owns it, and then automate, vulnerability scans, creating tickets, syncing with ServiceNow, et cetera. So the future is going to look very similar to that, just, expanding along the way as our customers guide us. And I'm looking forward to it, and it's already very much underway. So I've been working on that and trying to get that information out there.
Yeah. So looking at the attack surface management and threat intel, merging that together and getting attack surface intelligence together. That's what the future holds.
Love it.
We got 10 minutes left, or 13. See if there's any questions amongst the group here. If anybody
Perfect
wants to
segue. I actually have quite a few questions that I think we can hit right now. First one, we've been talking about the attack surface. Brandon, you mentioned, a percentage of the attack surface that most organizations miss. How do I know if I'm missing 30% or so that you say most organizations are missing outside the firewall?
It's a good question. I would just say, what does your current process look like for gathering the information today? That's probably a good indication of whether or not you're missing anything. If you're reliant on processes that are maybe antiquated, like manual intervention or scanning of new assets, then you're probably already behind. So I would almost just, similar to, I think it was CrowdStrike just said, like, there's two types of businesses, those that have been compromised and those that just don't know it yet. I want to say that was them. Similar in that regard is just assume that you are missing 30%. How does that kind of change your response? And whether you want to go with Expanse or RiskIQ or one of the other vendors that are out there, I think it's important for you to kind of actually go and engage those types of vendors and say, hey, what does my attack surface look like? You guys say you can do this. There's no agents required. Let me see it. We're happy to indulge there and provide like an attack surface snapshot and work with teams. So, you know what? I'll put on my sales hat. If you want to figure it out, come ask us.
Awesome. Related to the threat intelligence and attack surface, we have a question here about, will I get alerted when the threat intelligence matches the attack surface?
Today we do this for customers on the digital footprint side. So when we do identify new alerts, there's ways to configure getting alerts to it, and our research team does publish information. In the future, that will likely be, I don't know if that'll be baked into the initial release of the attack surface into the investigative side, but I know long-term that is the intention, that you could essentially define what it is of interest to you. And when we observe that from RiskIQ's perspective, we would alert you as an analyst to then go make a decision. And better yet, I know we're looking for ways to actually then automate certain decisions as well. If this happens, then post a webhook over this Slack channel or create a ticket in my Jira service to kind of triage or generate a new SIM event.
Or if a threat intel article comes out, do I have infrastructure in my attack surface that matches?
Right. Makes sense. Next, someone's asking, can you walk through a typical scenario where someone would use passive total for attack surface findings?
Yeah. So if I log in, let's say I work at Roku, and so I work at Roku and I have a community account, and I'm seeing like kind of the tiles that I showed initially, kind of vulnerable technologies or technologies that are recently being exploited by nation states. The start there is, if it is greater than 0 in any one of those little tiles, then you're going to want to understand the assets that are behind that and start performing an investigation and seeing if you have compensating controls and seeing if those assets need to be patched. That's probably the fastest way, and what we anticipate is going to happen when businesses leverage that new functionality we deliver.
Got it. We talked a bit about third party and third-party components as well. How do you suggest leveraging the attack surface intel for third-party risk/scoring?
Scores are baked into our digital footprint product, and we're actively, as part of another release that's currently in staging, I can talk about this one. We're going to be providing verdict information across passive total. So each individual asset in a way will be scored. And that score will be comprised of a set of facts that help make up that score. So as an analyst, you'll be able to understand whether or not a piece of infrastructure is potentially malicious and why that is the case based on everything we know. And that extends over to our attack surface visibility. So you saw briefly, I kind of demonstrated the risk scores there. We're looking to unify both of those and then, of course, expose those out via APIs as well. So the verdict information with facts and other kind of scoring telemetry will be available through something that we'll be working through partners to distribute that information through.
Good. Thanks, Brandon. This question's for everyone. Looking into your crystal balls for next year, is there a particular industry that you feel might be more targeted than others we've seen this year so far?
I'm going to ponder for a
Yeah.
moment. I was really hoping this would go
Brandon,
zero.
Brandon, you said it best. From what you were seeing after COVID, we're still going to be in this lockdown and kind of sheltered in place in some regard for next year, maybe even the entirety of next year, depending on how things go. But hospitals.
I'm going to say education, because I think there's going to be a massive blowback from the hospital bit
Sure.
that Ryuk did. I think that's just someone's going to make an absolute, like, they're just going to decimate the individuals involved in that or find a way to get at them. And I think that education is a softer target that has, that impacts like businesses and schools. Like the vaccine is being kind of rolled out in the UK, but it's still not fully operationalized in the States. It's going to take some time before like schools are truly back to normal. That's going to be my prediction.
I think you're right, because all the schools don't know if they're going to go in person or not, and they're sending emails and their websites and infrastructure being stood up. Yeah, you're probably right on target on that, I would have to say. I wasn't thinking that, but you're right.
I'm thinking chimney sweeps. We haven't seen a good chimney sweep breach in a long time, so it's bound to happen next year, 2021. Put money on it.
Santa,
Hell,
all the
what are you
time.
talking about, man? It's going to happen on the 25th of this year. There's going to be a couple chimney sweeps.
Santa's coming down.
Where's my Tesla? That's what, Benjamin, where's my Tesla? That's all I want to know. I've been a good boy all this year.
Yeah, Tesla just had a hack where you can use a device and clone somebody's key. That was just announced recently.
But no, in all seriousness, I would say it's probably not one particular industry, because as we're talking about this digital transformation, a lot of folks are having to learn cloud really quickly. So the issues we saw a couple years ago with S3 buckets and things like that, where folks just didn't know what they were doing, I think we're going to have folks across the world that are going to run into the same issues that we've seen over the years as people adopted the cloud. So I think it's going to be a broad stroke across different industries.
Yeah, that's probably more accurate.
Than the chimney sweep.
Then all of them combined, right?
Got it. Thanks, guys. I know we're coming up here on time really quickly. I want to leave.
Here's my new picture, because I know this is what's going to happen.
Yep. Marketing for Roku. He's just like trying to sneak it in there.
I know that when we hang up, that's going to be like my Slack name. That's going to be everything now. So I want to make sure that if we didn't get to any questions that you had, you can email us at success@riskiq.net. This has been a great workshop, because it's very rare that we get such a caliber of guests on here that talk about what happened last year and where we see the future going, and getting into examples. So I really wanted to end this year with something big, and then to show that with all the bad stuff that happened over this last year, there's been some good. People are moving to the cloud a lot faster than we thought, but you don't have to despair, because we're going to try to put things out there that's going to really help you navigate and be prepared. So that's one of the big things I wanted to make sure that you saw, is that it's not all dark. There's been some good that came out of the integrations, the threat intel stuff, all the stuff that we were planning and doing to give you those real observations, to give you relevant and actionable information so you can make good decisions based on facts. And that's what these workshops are there for. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today, because it's very rare that I get made fun of on threat hunting workshop. And so I think that's great. It keeps me humble. So thank you. But this has been amazing, and I'd like, anytime you want to come back, Chris, Ronald, and Brandon, please, because I think that you bring an aspect that's really real. It's down to earth, and it's really the facts, and really helps the industry improve, and that's why we do this.
Anytime.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys for attending. Thanks for the dialogue. And Benjamin, thank you for hosting a lot of the threat hunting workshops that continue on, the original kind of concept, right? Like my boy Steve, it's out there. He's not dead, but love him very much, like a brother. Him and I did these workshops, God knows how many years ago, in Taiwan, I think was the original start.
Yeah.
And they have certainly evolved, since then. And that was what we were laughing about before this all started. So, Benjamin, you carry the torch. Thank you for everybody who's attended not only this one, but all of the workshops that we've done and continue to do for the industry. And hopefully you have a little bit more fun with this one. And I love Benjamin. He knows that I love him, so I'm not shaming him.
I love you too. So it's nice that I get to be teased just like Steve. So I feel like I'm honored.
Yeah, just imagine. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.